I'd like to share one of the koans in the Hidden Lamp, which we looked at one of these koans a couple of weeks ago. This is the Hidden Lamp. I would recommend this book. It's a compilation of stories, koan stories, of women practitioners, edited by Florence Kaplow and Susan Moon. So I'm going to read out the koan, read a little bit of the commentary that's in here, and then go through the koan itself line by line. Because one of the things we've discovered in our koan class, and discovered in general when you study koans, is so every word, every line, there's something to be revealed by it. There's no accidental words, there's no wasted words. So we'll go through it in a bit of detail, but I'll just read it first of all. Chiyono's no water, no moon. And Chiyono lived in 13th century Japan, and when we chant the women ancestors, which for our Sangha we do during Sesshin, Chiyono is the last name on the list of women ancestors that we chant. Chiyono was a servant in a Zen convent who wanted to practice Zazen. One day she approached an elderly nun and asked, "I'm of humble birth. I can't read or write and must work all the time. Is there any possibility that I could attain the way of Buddha, even though I have no skills?" The nun answered, "This is wonderful, my dear. In Buddhism, there are no distinctions between people. There is only this. Each person must hold fast to the desire to awaken and cultivate a heart of great compassion. People are complete as they are. If you don't fall into delusive thoughts, there is no Buddha and no sentient being. There is only one complete nature. If you want to know your true nature, you need to turn towards the source of your delusive thoughts. This is called Zazen." Chiyono said with happiness, "With this practice as my companion, I have only to go about my daily life practicing day and night." After months of wholehearted practice, she went out on a full moon night to draw water from the well. The bottom of her old bucket, held together by bamboo strips, suddenly gave way, and the reflection of the moon vanished with the water. When she saw this, she attained great realization. Her enlightenment poem was this: "With this and that, I tried to keep the bucket together, and then the bottom fell out. Where the water does not collect, the moon does not dwell." So that's the koan. And I'll read just part of the commentary by a woman teacher in the United States, Merle Kodo Boyd. "For several years now, I have kept a picture and her bucket on the bulletin board above my desk. It is a delicate 19th century woodblock print of young Chiyono standing in pale moonlight, a bottomless bucket at her feet, a puddle of water spreading across her path. The artist is Yoshitoshi. I was drawn to Chiyono's verse the first time I heard it. I was seized by the words, 'With this and that, I tried to keep the bucket together.' When I first heard her verse, I had been practicing for 10 or 12 years. I was keenly aware of the constant tension of keeping the bucket together. I understood that the intent of practice was to relax my grip on the old bucket. But conditioning runs deep and the sense of personal identity is strong. Hearing the words, with this and that, I felt the exhaustion of years of vigilance, all aimed at protecting my idea of myself. I felt the exhaustion of being my own obstacle. Our Zen practice is medicine to this conditioning. All the practices within Zen challenge the illusion of the perfect bucket. Zazen, the teacher-student relationship, ritual, Sangha relationships. As much as I may wish to appear competent at all times, I cannot immerse myself in Zen practice without a willingness to come apart. Sometimes it's appropriate to stop patching things back together. What then allows us to leave the bits and pieces scattered on the ground, like the splinters of the bucket around Chiyono's feet? We are conditioned to keep the bucket from falling to pieces. Unique personal circumstances can intensify this general conditioning. I was the first generation of Southern black children consciously raised to enter integrated schools. In such circumstances, everything seemed to ride on keeping it together, especially in public, and so we were conscientious and hypervigilant in order to prevent disaster. And yet, we Zen students have chosen a path that calls us in the opposite direction. In spite of our conditioning, we are called to awareness rather than vigilance. We are on a path of no water, no moon. Our conditioning tells us that this is a risky path, and yet we sense its offer of freedom and feel called to take it. As Zen students, we live between Chiyono's first 2 lines and her second 2 lines, between keeping things from falling apart and letting them fall apart. Knowing how to keep things together is a valuable skill. It was knowing how to care for things that led Chiyono to continuously patch the bucket. When it fell apart, she made excellent use of that circumstance as well. Our liberation deepens with the refinement of our capacity for flexibility and discernment. Moving between patched bucket and bottomless bucket, I can exercise my freedom to keep things together or let things come apart according to the circumstances. I have come to trust the true freedom of living where the moon does not dwell. So there are some of the reflections from Merle Kodo Boyd. There's some nice music in the background here. Can you hear it online? A little bit, yeah. It's very rainy today in Canberra, so there's lots of rain falling, and people seem to be celebrating here at the temple, the Sakyamuni temple. So the koan starts with, Chiyono was a servant in a Zen convent and wanted to practice Zazen. I think that she was a servant is instructive for us. Even though she may have been a servant because of her position in society, maybe she had no other choice. But nevertheless, a servant is someone who benefits others, who looks after others, who does things for others. That's what a servant does. They cook food, they collect water, they make beds. They take people places, maybe they mind children. So I think the fact that she was a servant, we can think about maybe being in that condition has actually created a rightness already. People who are kind just because of the life they have, and maybe they had parents who were kind and siblings that were kind, so they have a habit of being kind. That is already creating excellent conditions for being able to awaken to the Buddha's teachings of true nature, of oneness, of wholeness. So all of us should feel very kind of glad that we've been kind in our lives and see that as a great gift and an opportunity that we have been servants to others in our lives. So she was a servant at a Zen convent. So that's an added bonus to be a servant at a Zen convent. And she wanted to practice Zazen. So we really don't know why it is that sometimes we turn towards the Dharma. It just happens that we turn towards the Dharma at some point in our life. We can kind of say it's circumstance, but nevertheless, at that moment, we take that turn. We decide, oh, this is interesting. I want to know more about this. You could say it's our true nature has just been in there waiting to find circumstances, because we know that constant restlessness is not our actual birthright. Continual restlessness, trying to keep a bucket together, is only one part of our life. There is a whole other way in which we can be at ease, even while we do patch the bucket. And I think we sense that. And so that sensing that is there waiting until the right moment arrives. And so she approaches an elderly nun, and she probably approached an elderly nun because an elderly nun is more likely to be a mature practitioner. Not necessarily so, but maybe more likely to be so. They've had more years to reflect and to contemplate. And they've had more challenges. The longer you live, the more challenges you often have. And you've navigated them and you've stayed alive. So she approaches an elderly nun and asks. And we can see ourselves in this question here that she asks. I am of humble birth. I can't read or write and must work all the time. Is there any possibility that I could attain the way of Buddha even though I have no skills? And of course many of us come to practice with a feeling of insecurity, like, can I do this? Am I worthy enough? Do I have what it takes? Do I have the discipline? Am I not too broken? Am I not too stained in some way? So she says she's of humble birth. And of course it's easier to enter the Dharma if we have some humility. It's a little harder if we come in being prideful and thinking, I'm going to nail this, I'm going to nail it in a year. If we come in with that attitude, we might, but it might be slightly more challenging. So coming in with some humility is good, not that kind of corrosive self-doubt, not that kind of self-doubt, but just a general humility. And she says, I can't read or write, and I must work all the time. So this is a good instruction, I think, for lay practitioners. We don't have to be great scholars. We don't have to live in a monastery. We can have jobs. We can have responsibilities. And we can still attain the way of Buddha. That's how it's worded here. Is there any possibility that I could attain the way of Buddha even though I have no skills? In fact, having no skills is probably a safer place to start, coming from a more of an empty cup kind of a place, rather than I've already done a whole lot of stuff, and so I can jump in at the top end. Better to probably come in with no skills. And of course, any possibility, the teaching is that anybody can awaken. One has to work, and it's going to say that in a few moments, but nobody is excluded. So there is, of course, great possibility of attaining the way of Buddha, even with no skills, and even if you can't read or write, and even if you have to work hard. So the nun answered her, "This is wonderful." She says, "This is wonderful, my dear." I kind of like, this is wonderful. It's a wonderful thing when we come to the Dharma. And the nun says, in Buddhism there is no distinctions between people. So we've just gone over that. And it's important to really realise the truth of that. Like for us individually, often people harbour a secret self-doubt. But it's available to everybody. So if anybody has that feeling of self-doubt, just harbouring a little secret self-doubt, see if you can notice it. And think, this might be getting in my way, this little bit of self-doubt. You don't have to try and crush it or anything. Just be aware that there's a little bit of self-doubt and see if you can hear the teaching that the Dharma is available to everyone, without exception. To everyone. Even if you've done things that you feel very guilty about, it's still open to you. So the nun then says, there is only this. Each person must hold fast to the desire to awaken and cultivate a heart of great compassion. So there's only this. It's not complicated. It's only this. Very straightforward. Just this one way. It's only this. Hold fast to the desire to awaken. So that's that is encouraging us to make an effort. Hold fast to this desire to awaken. Hold fast. Some mornings you might not want to do Zazen, and sometimes it's worth pushing through that resistance and doing it anyway. Sometimes you won't. You'll sleep in, and that's okay too. But there is this holding fast does have a sense of a bit of effort. Effort is required. Keep that your compass is set on north. Hold fast to this desire to awaken. And this is really just awakening to the way things are. And cultivate a heart of great compassion. So this is wisdom and compassion always go together. We want to be wise and we want to be kind. Wise and kind, wise and kind. And the nun goes on to say, people are complete as they are. So this is, of course, somewhat confusing, that we're complete as we are and we need to make an effort. This comes up quite often. We need to make an effort and we're complete as we are. The effort is to deeply realise that we are okay as we are. And it actually takes effort to realise that. You can't just think, you can't just say it like a line that you repeat, like a sentence that you put on your, a magnet on the fridge. I'm okay as I am. It doesn't work that way. You can't do it just as an intellectual thing. It takes effort to realise that we're okay as we are, that we're perfect as we are. It actually takes effort to undo all of the habitual thinking that we're not okay. And of course, we're also talking about everybody else. Everybody is essentially pure. People are complete as they are. If you don't fall into delusive thoughts, there is no Buddha and no sentient being. There is only one complete nature. So the delusive thoughts are thoughts of me and you, here and there, all the dualistic combinations, hot and cold, good and bad, high and low. We need all of those pairings to function in life, but the teaching is to understand that they are just a convention. They're just one way of seeing things. There's another way, which is the interdependent non-separation of everything. No separate self, no separate Buddha, no separate enlightenment, no separate moon, no separate water. If you don't fall into delusive thoughts, there is no Buddha and no sentient being. There is only one complete nature. It's a beautiful feeling to feel this one complete nature. I'm sure all of us feel that some of the time at least. This sense of intimacy and connectedness with everything, and just the simple joy of seeing things. Like right now, because the rain is so heavy, there's ponds out here, lots of ponds with lotus flowers and lotus leaves, and the rain is just like pounding down on the water, making all the water, vibrate with all the different ripples. But the leaves are sort of sitting fairly still, with just some little beads of water on them. So the leaves are sort of dry and still, and all the water around them is really active. And it's just beautiful to see it and feel connected to it, to notice it, rather than the tendency that many people have for their eyes not to be seeing very well, because their eyes are sort of focusing inward on thoughts about things, self-referencing thoughts about things. We miss all this beauty out here. So seeing the oneness of all things, we notice more, we notice things more. And we celebrate. In our minds, we have just a natural feeling of celebration. If you want to know your true nature, you need to turn towards the source of your delusive thoughts. This is called Zazen. So to turn towards the source of our delusive thoughts. And that's partly of what we do in Zazen, is we notice, what are my thought habits? What type of repetitive things do I say to myself, about myself and about the world? We notice them. And it doesn't say here that we need to get rid of them. We just need to turn towards the source of our delusive thoughts. Which means, what is the common thread in my delusive thoughts? And each of us can discover that for ourselves. And different people have different words for it, but in the end it's the same thing that they see. So each of us needs to see for ourselves, what is the source of my delusive thoughts? So hearing all of this instruction from the nun, Chiyono says, with happiness. So she says it with happiness. What she's about to say, she says with happiness. And that's important too. She doesn't say it with like, oh my God, the burden now. I've got this heavy burden of trying to wake up. She doesn't do it like that. With happiness, she says, with this practice as my companion, I have only to go about my daily life practicing day and night. So she's joyfully going to practice day and night as she's fetching water, as she's caring for the people in the monastery, with the practice as my companion. I think that's just beautiful too, It's her companion, it's always with her. She's never alone. And our practice can be that for us. There's no loneliness in the Sangha. There's no loneliness with the Dharma. No loneliness with the Buddha. We always have it as our constant companion. Then after months of wholehearted practice, she went out on a full moon night. So full moons are a symbol of the awakened heart-mind. It's beautiful thinking about a full moon night. You know, there's something peaceful and serene, but everything is illuminated in this beautiful, cool glow of the moon. So she went out on a full moon night to draw water from the well. The bottom of her old bucket, held together by bamboo strips, suddenly gave way. And this is what Merle Kodo Boyd reflected on mostly in her words here, was on this sense of holding the bucket together. And with this and that, I held the bucket together. You know, it's just, we just know this about ourselves, how, you know, we go through our life keeping it together, trying to keep it together. The bottom of her old bucket, held together by bamboo strips. You can kind of feel a little bit of the tiredness involved in that process of holding a bucket together with bamboo strips, just like we hold our lives together. So this old bucket gave way, suddenly gave way. It suddenly gave way. And this is how awakening happens. It's a sudden dropping away of delusive thoughts. Just sudden seeing into the nature of things. And the reflection of the moon vanished with the water. The moon is a symbol of enlightenment, and water is often it has various symbols, but it can also be a symbol of the kind of feeling states that, you know, the conventional life of moods going up and down, you know, like tears falling down our cheek. Water is a bit like tears. The effort involved in holding buckets together. So all of a sudden, when the bottom gave way in her bucket, the reflection of the moon vanished with the water. So any thoughts about being enlightened or not being enlightened, or being in a good mood or not in a good mood, all of that just vanished. It all vanished in a flash. She attained great realization, and her enlightenment poem was this: with this and that, I tried to keep the bucket together, and then the bottom fell out. Where the water does not collect, the moon does not dwell. I think it's nice too that it's got where the water does not collect. There's a sense of sort of spontaneous, moment by moment, just being fresh in each moment, not collecting and building one thing on top of the other thing and carrying it all around with us, carrying a heavy weight around with us. We can function in a way where we recognise cause and effect, all of the past causes and conditions, and we can be fresh and free and just in this moment. So that's where the water doesn't collect. And there's no bottom in the bucket, the water doesn't collect. And then the moon does not dwell, or you could say it doesn't linger. There's just a freedom. Just a freedom. It's a beautiful koan. I love this story of Chiyono's no water, no moon. All right. just turn off the recording.